must know about that will help me to understand the Simon Cowell that all of us know so well? What is that early context, the oven that you were cooked in?
Well, I had a happy childhood. I was always bored, though, really bored at school. I always wanted to have a life where I would be interested and have fun. When I was told the school days are the best days of your life, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is terrible because I hate school. So I was really determined to do something where I would be actually just having fun. That's what I kept thinking to myself. And I want to start making my own money. And one thing my parents did do when we were very, very young, because in those days, you could actually, even at the age of about 7 or 8, in our neighborhood, is go around to people's houses, knock on their door and say, can I wash your car? Can I mow the lawn? Because my mum and dad said, if we pay for the holiday, you've got to earn your spending money. So I'm like, fine. So, but I used to love it. If you got 10 quid for like washing a car, I mean, it was like bingo. It was the best feeling. So
You mentioned your mother there. Can you tell me about the influence that your mother and your father, Julie and Eric, had on you?
when I lost them, particularly when I lost my mum, because then it was kind of final, it was the most devastating thing that ever happened in my life. I mean, it was as bad as things could possibly be. And we just had the most amazing relationship. My mum was the disciplinarian. I remember I must have been about 4 years old, maybe even younger. And I remember where I was sitting in the car, and she said something to me, and she said, manners maketh the man. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? She goes, manners maketh the man. And then she explained what that meant. And it's always stuck in my head because it's such an old-fashioned way of saying be polite. Mm-hmm. Both my parents were very kind of old school. They were very respectful to everyone. I always remember that. And I looked up to both of them. And I always knew at any time I could go to them when I needed advice. And they would always give me the right steer. And they were always there for me.
Your work ethic is renowned.
Yeah.
I've spoken to a lot of people in your team currently. And one of the things they always described is through much of what got you to where you are today is an insane work ethic. And when I say insane, I mean insane with every sense of the word. Mm. Where does that come from? Because, you said your childhood was happy. Mm-hmm. And typically when someone has a pretty insane work ethic, there's some kind of trauma at somewhere, But for you, I couldn't quite identify what that was.
It probably comes from my dad worked for a large corporation. And before he retired, he said to me, don't work for a large company because when you're, 65 or whatever, they're going to retire you and you'll never hear from them again. And that is exactly what happened to my dad. And it was heartbreaking because he did work hard. He was a very loyal person, to the company he worked for. When he passed away, he didn't have any money. That's probably what made me realize, A, I don't want to be in that position. And secondly, the only way I can achieve that is by working for myself. And I always had this crazy vision of if I work for a company and I don't get on well with the boss, he's going to probably invite me to his house and talk about golf. I just always had this in my head thinking I couldn't think of anything worse than having to suck up to a boss who doesn't like me. And the reason I kept thinking my boss would never like me is because I was so bad at school. Mm-hmm. And my teachers were quite strict with me. So I thought work was probably going to be the same. Mm-hmm. So that's what drove me. And, my dad also, he knew because I didn't do very well with my exam results. And he did say to me, it's quite clear, Simon, you're not going to make university. Have you made up your mind what you want to do? And I said, I want to do something, I think, in entertainment. I'm not sure what. And he said, look, whatever you do, you're going to have to be patient because it's not going to happen overnight. If you want to do well, you've got to learn to be good at it. And it could take 20 years, it could take 30 years, but understand that. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. And I really was fine with that.
Your dad seems like a man that gave a lot of actual advice. A lot of advice that, frankly, I read your book as well, that you can still remember to this day. Because my parents taught me things, but vicariously by watching them. I can't think of a single sentence that my parents said to me that was advice. But you've got so much advice that you recite from your father, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Well, yeah, one of the things that always stuck in my mind, and it was quite an odd thing to say to a 12-year-old, he said, everyone in life, Simon, has a sign on their head and it says, make me feel important. And I want you to think about that. I'm thinking, sign on their head? Well, I have no idea what that means. Why do you say that? Maybe he's had a couple of drinks. And then I forget when I realized what it meant, but boy, did that stick in my mind, which was, if you want to do well in life, it's going to be a team effort, and make sure you recognize every single person on that team. And so if I walk into a room, I instantly, I think pretty much from the point I understood it, is that I can walk into a room and I see everything in one moment. I see the person who's opening the door. I see the person who's doing a particular job. So in other words, I see the room always as a team.
And you did that the minute you walked into this room, because there was, 10 people here, from the person that opened the door, the person that got the coffee, the people, taking care of the cameras, and this is rare. And obviously I've done 300 of these conversations. You went around to every single person in this room and took an interest in every single person, it's not typical. Especially when you're dealing with people that have a big sort of public profile. We've had people walk in, completely ignore me for 10 minutes, sit down and text and take phone calls.
Nice. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
And I see an awful lot of hypocrisy, which are people, yes, who on the outside, they show one side of it. I then always see that person when they're off camera and who they really are. And they are the opposite. They will just, like you said, completely ignore everybody. The worst thing is, and I had this as I was, trying to get my career started, there's nothing worse than when you're talking to somebody and as they're talking to you, they're looking for someone more important than you. I remember feeling that, at an early age in my career, and how that felt. And it was very demeaning. And I suppose, those two stories about my mum and dad, they were really, really, really important things. And they must have known that that would mean something for me later on in life. And I've said the same thing to my son, Eric. I remember the first time I said to him, Eric, manners maketh the man. He was about 2. And he's like, give me, and he repeated it back completely wrong. I said, no, say it again. And then eventually, I think he must have been about 4, and he was very polite to someone. And I said, I'm very proud of you, Eric. And he went, manners maketh the man, Daddy. And I'm like, you've got it.
Maybe you need a little bit of patience. Trying to indoctrinate the 2-year-old into... But you turn to your father and you express that you'll pursue entertainment and music. At sort of 12, how old were you when you first said that to your father? I would have been about 12-ish. There was nothing I excelled in at school at all. You were surrounded by music people and entertainment people where you lived. I think your dad at one point worked at EMI.
Yeah,
briefly.
He worked for their real estate division.
Is that where music? Because I'm trying to figure out where music came from. I've got this kid that's naughty, not paying attention in school. I read the stories about you holding up a bus with a spud gun. Should have said that as you were drinking. But they called the police because you were holding up a bus with a spud gun. And I'm thinking, where does music come into it? Because it doesn't appear that you were playing a huge amount of musical.
Well, I loved buying records.
Yeah.
So just, going into a record shop and saving up enough money for to buy a single or an album was just everything. So most of my spending money would go on records. I can vividly remember going into my bedroom with a brand new album and just loving listening to every single track on it. It was such an exciting feeling.
So when you leave school and you go off and try and find your own career, you worked a few jobs. You were a trainee at Tesco, I think, at one point.
Well, my dad, he said, okay, you failed all your exams twice. So you're going to have to get a job, Simon. And since you're not qualified, what about Tesco's? I don't know where that came from. I'm like, doing what? And he said, well, you could end up maybe managing a store or something. And I'm like, okay. So I turned up at this interview and I remember I wore jeans. And before I even sat down, the guy said, how dare you? How dare you come in here wearing jeans? And I'm like, I'm sorry. He said, well, how dare you? And I was so annoyed. I said, you know what? I'm really glad I came here because I never want to work for you or your company. And by the way, your office looks like shit. And walked out. So that didn't go down well. My mum made an application for me to work for the civil service. So I was interviewed to be, I think, like a law clerk or something. And they actually had a chart which told you exactly how much money you would make at the age of 64. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. Then my dad thought I should be in the building trade and I was going to have to work at this sort of building site, whatever it was, for 2 years to learn everything. And I thought, no. And then eventually I got a job as a runner at Elstree Studios. And the second I got that job, it was like brilliant. I was so happy. And it was hard work.
Why? Why was that job, you described it, I think, as a sliding doors moment in your life. Why was that job, why was that capture your heart?
I'd kind of worked out that how to become a director, you have to become a third assistant, second assistant, first assistant, 2 years in editing, suites, blah, blah, blah. And I was up for that. I thought, this is something I think I would love. Unfortunately, the contract I had only lasted for 2 months. And the executive producer was so mean that he said after 2 months, well, that's it. We don't need you anymore. But the PAs liked me so much. They